town of Whitesboro is a prosperous home of over 2,000 people. However, unknown to many is its rich history as a safe haven for African Americans decades ago. Tons of amazing contributions to our community were inspired by citizens of the town. Founded in 1901, its amazing legacy is a story worth being told to this day.
The creation of Whitesboro was influenced by many factors, one of these being Booker T. Washington. He was a segregation activist, and he had said that African Americans can be separate but equal. Whitesboro's creation was also influenced by whites in Cape May calling for the removal of blacks. With these issues in mind, an idea for an all-black community began brewing in many citizens' minds.
This amazing town of Whitesboro was founded by George Henry White and the African American Equitable Industrial Association. White was an African American congressman from North Carolina at the start of the 20th century who fought for the rights of African Americans. After obtaining the funds for his project, the purchase of Whitesboro's land was finalized in December of 1901. Colonists came from North Carolina wanting to get away from the Jim Crow laws. Most of these people moved to Whitesboro. They received land for $5 down, this being over $150 today. They promised to till the land. The only other requirement was to be of good character.
As occupants slowly began to develop the town, many establishments began to appear. These included a grammar school, 4 churches, a post office, and a hotel, named the Odessa Inn after White's deceased daughter.
The grammar school, which opened on October 1st, 1910, operated until September 7th, 1967, and housed grades 1st to 8th. Though not segregated, Whitesboro schools were inhabited almost solely by black children, reflecting on the population of the town. Former students depicted the school as friendly and a nurturing environment. After spending the majority of their life in Whitesboro, students would then visit an integrated high school in Cape May.
Whitesboro churches played a large part in the lives of its inhabitants. Having 4 unique churches presented many variations in the religion of the townspeople. These churches being the Baptist, Methodist, Holiness, and Seventh-day Adventist were all variations on the Christian church. Every Sunday, residents of the town would congregate for service, strengthening the bond of the community.
With all of the diverse businesses and establishments present, employment was definitely not a problem in Whitesboro. They had many jobs such as teachers, they worked in hotels and private home resorts, Cape May Naval Base and airfields, and were fishers and construction workers. Construction workers were a main part of Whitesboro, as they built all of the most important buildings that created the town to become what it is now.
Many factors went into the success of Whitesboro. Though not obvious on the surface, its remarkable history still lives on now in several remnants. Take a look at the streets named after its founders, or one of its many historical landmarks that still stand, and you'll begin to realize the depth of the town's rich history. Founded in 1901 as a safe haven for black residents, today the city of Whitesboro lives on as a symbol of diversity.
Whitesboro was established in 1902 and was built exclusively for African Americans. This idea was formed in an attempt to have more black residents in Cape May County. The lands were purchased by the Cape May AME Zion Church, the African American Equitable Industrial Association.
With the help of many investors and the George Henry White Land Improvement Company, the land ended up being 2,000 acres long. The land would be 10 miles north of Cape May and would be $14,000. Today, that would be $429,951.
When the purchase of the land has finalized, the opportunity to have a new life appeared in newspapers, magazines, and letters. Once people replied, they would need to have good character and would be allowed a small plot of 50 feet to 150 feet. They would also need to pay $5 down to the land. The residents had no obligation to build a house. The owners of the town would either charge the person $2 or $5 depending on income. The colonists had 10 years to pay off the initial price that they had paid to move there. In 1902, the town had been named Whitesboro after George Henry White.
Jobs in Whitesboro were simple. They would farm the land or they would work for the improvement company to build roads, first buildings of Whitesboro, and schools of the community. By 1909, the town had 100 plus citizens and had 2 fully functioning churches.
Segregation affected tourism in New Jersey in many ways. Most of the segregation was in the south areas of New Jersey.
In New Jersey, segregation was not fully legalized, so people just mostly stayed in their place. Since segregation wasn't fully legalized, people would still get others in trouble for being in places they shouldn't be.
Chicken Bone Beach is a beach in Atlantic City, New Jersey for blacks. Chicken Bone Beach is also famous for having famous blacks there.
Segregation was not very popular in North Jersey. Segregation affected tourism also because since some places were segregated, like Chicken Bone Beach, so some stores wouldn't get as much money if they were run by blacks because whites were usually richer, so the stores run by blacks had to make the things they sell cheaper so that people could buy them and the store could still run.
United States, the Jim Crow laws were enforced. This meant separate but equal for blacks and whites. These laws were developed after a black man tried to sit in the white section of a railway car. These laws were developed to mock African Americans because Jim Crow was a popular racist blackface performer. However, in New Jersey, these laws were rarely applied. Until the 60s, there was segregation all over America. There were specified water fountains, bathrooms, and buildings for all white and colored people. Children's education was affected by this as well. But this type of segregation would have been the most damaging. However, in New Jersey, only a few elementary schools were affected by this. This led to the fact that all high schools were integrated in South Jersey. People like Ruby Bridges helped segregation in the education system all over the world. Although segregation was not enforced, it happened on its own in New Jersey, mainly on where people lived. In the 1900s, Cape May newspapers wanted all African Americans to be removed from the area of living. This caused them to flee Whitesboro. Since most African Americans lived in Whitesboro, the elementary school was all black.
Franklin Street School was the school for black children in Cape May, but when it came to high school, everyone went to school together because they were integrated. Near the shore, African Americans were segregated also by where they lived. They mainly lived in Wildwood while the whites lived in Wildwood Crest. Some of the beaches were also segregated, not by law but by choice.
This law was not strictly applied but just occurred within the community. Though things have changed greatly through history and we live a very culturally diverse life, areas still tend to be naturally segregated, such as schools in New Jersey today, like Ocean City High School. The enrollment for African Americans is 20, while Caucasian has 1,140 students enrolled in Ocean City High School. At Winslow Township, the enrollment for African Americans is 442, and there are 143 Caucasian enrolled students. Even at our own school, the diversity is not totally balanced. There are 92 African Americans and 346 Caucasian students enrolled. Hopefully, natural segregation decreases as time goes on.
In this video, you will learn lots about George Henry White and how he formed the town of Whitesboro and much more.
Before we talk about all the things he did, let's talk about his childhood. George Henry White was born on December 18, 1852 in Roselandale, Bladen County, North Carolina, and his father was a free black man while his mother was a slave somewhere.
He worked as a farm laborer until 1873. After he was done with slavery, he started to study at Howard University. This lasted from 1873 to 1876.
George then was a teacher and a lawyer in New Bern.
In 1880, he was elected to the House of Representatives as a member of the Republican Party.
He campaigned for an increased speeding for African American education. He even helped establish 4 new schools and served as a principal in the School of New Bern.
And in 1885, George ran for the Senate and was elected state Senate. He served on the committee at the Insane Asylum and Insurance and Judiciary.
Fast forward a couple years, and White was elected Congress in 1896. He was the last former slave to serve in Congress, and in 1898, he was the last African American in the House of Representatives.
Then, in 1901, White made a law that lynching was a federal crime.
Lynching is when you kill someone without trial.
People used to always kill African Americans without trial just because they didn't like them.
When George made the law, lynching stopped, but some African Americans were still being poorly mistreated in the South. George Henry White founded Whitesboro in 1901. After founding Whitesboro, he went to Philadelphia.
Then, when White was in Philadelphia, he died on December 28, 1918. As you can see, White did many amazing things as an African American. Without George Henry White, we wouldn't have Whitesboro and he wouldn't go down in history.
As you can see, White
The Underground Railroad was a virtual route created for freedom. They would follow routes and stay at stations led by conductors. The Fugitive Slave Act made escaping dangerous for the slaves, those who helped and those who helped them. Cape May was a frequent stopping point for slaves that came north and south. The slaves worked in Cape May during the summer for their trip south. It was very hard for the slaves to escape to Cape May. Slaves would have to fight their hardest to get to Cape May.
Slaves escaped by tunnels. It was a great risk for slaves because if they were caught, they were returned to their owners. If the slaves escaped and got caught in Philadelphia, they were not returned. About 100,000 people escaped to freedom by 1830 to 1861. This was the first civil rights movement. Slaves also had safe houses to where they can't get caught.
Harriet Tubman was a famed conductor who worked in some unknown hotels in Cape May in the 1850s. She catered to African American guests in these hotels. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery and escaped. She made 7 missions to the south to bring slaves to the north to freedom. She was born in Dorchester County, Maryland. Her full name was Araminta Ross. She also served as a scout, spy, guerrilla soldier, and nurse for the Union Army during the Civil War. She died March 10, 1913 in Auburn, New York.
Stephen Smith was born a slave in Pennsylvania and he bought his freedom for $50. He also owned a very successful lumber company and then became very wealthy. He also became the wealthiest black man a couple years later. He arranged for thousands of slaves to reach Canada after the Fugitive Slave Act and owned a summer house in Cape May that still stands this day.